Welcome to the Business of Family, the podcast where we explore the stories, challenges, and opportunities of family businesses. I'm your host, Tammy Buss, and I'm a family business survivor, and I'm also a family business advisor. In this show, we'll be talking with family business leaders and experts to bring you insights and inspiration so you too can survive your family business journey. Whether you're a founder, a successor, a professional, or just curious about family business, this podcast is for you. Okay. Hi, welcome, Trevor.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So Trevor's our guest from Blue Jay Irrigation. He's the owner now of Blue Jay Irrigation, second generation, and we're here to talk about his transition from first to second generation.
That's correct. I would also phrase I'm second generation owner, but I've been fortunate to be third generation in the business.
Yes, I was going to say that. You have, so let's back up a little bit. So your dad started this business when?
So my dad started it in 1982. He was 16 years old. He started as a grass cutting company, and he was running it out of my grandparents' house. And then eventually he went to a Landscape Ontario show, saw this little irrigation booth in the back corner, and thought, that's a neat idea. Installed an irrigation system at my grandparents' house, and the rest is history. So my grandmother came home one day, opened the garage door, and there's a wall of pipe in the garage, and she knew Bruce was up to something new. So, but as the business evolved, my grandmother always did his bookkeeping, and my grandfather, on his days off, would work with him until he retired in 1995 and became his full-time service manager. So,
oh, really? Really? Yeah.
So as a kid, I had the opportunity to work alongside both my grandfather and my dad in the business.
And when did you start working in the business?
As soon as I could walk.
Yeah.
So when my grandfather would go on weekends to do a few service calls, he had a little shovel in the back of the van, and so I could dig alongside him, and I'd hit the next button on the controller, but I loved it because I was working, and so I worked alongside my grandfather, whether that was in the field, in the back shop, since I could walk, and loved hanging out with him. And with my dad, I remember snow plowing with him in the truck in the wintertime. I remember I was 8 years old. I did my first full summer with him, walking behind the machine, putting wire in the back of it, but I was working, so I was happy. So,
yeah. So you've got a brother, and your brother was sort of in and out of the business?
Yeah, so my brother, I would say he followed kind of in my footsteps in the sense that he saw it as a way of getting out of school. So I did a grade 12 co-op and did a 4-credit co-op, so I got to spend all spring working instead of going to school. So he did it as a way to, I think, more or less get out of school. And his buddy came along with him. But I think it got to the point where Brent was there more out of, I think, he felt like it was required of him more than out of passion. As it were, for me, it always came back to how can I get out of this so I can go to work?
Right.
Because I enjoyed it.
Because you loved it, right? So this was a true family business. I mean, it started in your grandparents' garage. Yeah. Your dad started. Your grandparents both came to work in the business. Your mom and also your brother in and out.
Yep, that's correct.
So it's a true family business. And where is it today? You have many locations. You started in London, Ontario. Where are you now?
Yeah, so my dad originally started in Strathroy and then gravitated to London. So London is our head office. So we have a head office in London. We have an operations location in London. And then we have a Kitchener location, Niagara Falls location, and a Blue Mountain location.
Wow, that's amazing. And I know a lot of this came under your helm. So tell us a little bit about the listeners about what it was like. So just to give you a little background, so Trevor was working with his dad, and his dad became sick and died quite suddenly, like it wasn't a long time, right? So tell us about that journey of working side by side with your dad so long, and then all of a sudden, you're now thrown into the lead, not the owner yet, but you are now the person who is running this company, correct?
Yeah, like I would say I came out of college, I did all the sales and marketing, eventually I was leading ops, and then I would say by 2015, 2016, I was running the business, the day-to-day for my father. It was the fall of 2017, he got sick and then passed away pretty much a year later in 2018. So there was a course of probably about 2 years there where I was running the day-to-day for him. So the day-to-day wasn't really the issue, but it was kind of the ownership things he did. The getting a signing authority, even just learning how to pay HST, as simple as that. I had never done it, right? And he always took care of it. So there was a big learning curve in the sense that there are things from an ownership perspective he was doing that I didn't have an opportunity to do. So I think the biggest issue was just, even though I had been pushing for some succession discussions, I think, and I understand it and I can reflect obviously easier now that I've been through it, but it's a hard conversation for the first generation or even second, third, whoever's in the day-to-day as ownership. It's hard to think about your own mortality and think about whether I'm stepping away, what if I pass. It is a hard discussion, and I understand that, but as much as I push, we never had that discussion, and until it was too late and he got sick, and then it became a rush factor, and so when ultimately he passed, there was a lot of pieces that weren't 100% set in stone or solidified. So there was a lot of navigation that had to happen after the fact. But fortunately, for myself, my dad and I had become partners in the business about 2017. And so I had kind of that pathway ahead of me. He was starting to let me paint the vision of where I saw Blue Jay going.
Right.
And he was starting to let go of the reins and letting me pursue the vision, push it forward. We developed a leadership team, which, I give him a lot of credit. He stepped back and let me build the leadership team, the people I needed around me.
And that's hard to do. I got to tell you, as a first generation, that's a hard thing to do, is to hand over reins to your child. Because, in our eyes, you're still our child, although you're an adult and quite capable. That's, he was pretty smart.
For sure. And I think part of it, too, is though his passion had shifted from Blue Jay, and he was full-time at our church.
Okay.
And so the church for him was his passion project, and he spent majority of his time there. So I think more than anything, he had the peace of mind that, okay, I've got it. I have a leadership team that's built around me to support the vision and pursue that vision together. It allowed him to step away and pursue the church and what he wanted to do with that. So
interesting, because as your dad did very well in teaching you how to run, as you say, operations in the day-to-day, but that discussion about ownership and succession really didn't happen. Now, walk me through. So when your dad did get his illness, of course at the beginning you're thinking you can beat it, right? But when it became obvious that he wasn't able to beat it, did you start to have those conversations about how you would transition or what the succession would look like? Because your mom would be the natural inheritor of the business, right? Because your mom is still alive.
For sure. And I think both my dad and I were on the same page that my mom wasn't going to be interested in continuing it on. And she, pretty much my entire life was involved in just the day-to-day care of my brother and I. It wasn't until we were out of the house and she had nothing to do that we brought her in, to help provide some purpose.
Just to clarify, if you're at home, you have a lot to do.
For sure. For sure.
Let me just take a little stab at you for that one.
For sure. I would say there's more of a gap once your kids are out of the
that's
house.
True. That's true.
But
you're not picking up, as I used to call it, dishes of penicillin, stuff growing under the bed and stuff.
Yeah, she wasn't doing that anymore. But I think it gave her a sense of purpose on a day-to-day, and we needed some help at the time, so it gave her something to do. But at the same time, that was about all the involvement she probably really wanted at the time. And so my dad was very aware too of the vision where I wanted to take the business and was very on board with that. So for him, it was we were on the same page from that standpoint that I was going to take the business over.
Right.
I was going to continue to pursue the vision. I think where we were disconnected was he was still trying to find a place for my brother. Right. And my brother...
And that's very common in family businesses,
100%.
Right?
And my brother was not... The passion wasn't there. And I eventually... And I think part of it is my dad, had this dream of we would take it and run it together. So I think for him, the difficulty was kind of setting that aside and really having that honest discussion. So it came to the point where my brother and I just sat down. I said to him, look, like, what do you want to do? Because if this is how you're going to be, it's not going to work.
Right.
And he just said, to be honest, I don't want to be here long term. This is not my passion. This is what I want to go do. I want to go start my own business in a completely different field.
Right.
I said, okay, well, let's figure this out. So we built the business plan for him. I figured out how we could support him for a year to get his feet under him and get him started. So we presented that to my dad. He wasn't on board initially. Like I said, there was that kind of that hope and dream that all of a sudden we're saying, no, that's not gonna be reality. So that was a challenge. But my dad came around to it and was on board. And I think it gave him peace knowing that my brother would be taken care of. He knew where he wanted to be and he was going to be happy. So after some time, he was on board with supporting it and coming around to that idea. I think where the other challenges were we didn't really lay out a lot of the structure of things or the reality of things in a sense. So, for example, I took the business over and there was a lot of, personal things being done in the business or, expectations that something would continue on. And if I'm buying the business, then no, like that's now my money going out the door, right?
Right.
So
because just to be clear for our listeners, when your dad passed, assets transferred to your mom because the succession plan hadn't been completed, right? So there was no, everything just went to your mom as opposed to we want to carve the business off, we want to do this, we want to do that. And so your mom was still the owner. So after your dad's passing, you ran the company, but you didn't own the company. It was your mom's or the buildings or the equipment or anything like that. So then talk to me about how those conversations, started. Because again, it's very common that a spouse is part of the business, but it's not their passion, nor do they really want to run it.
For sure. Right? I think the purchase part of it was already clear. So as soon as he passed, we gave it time. Like I basically kept running it, but he passed in November 2018. And I had purchased it by February 2019. So it was still pretty quick, that transition where she really didn't have to worry about the day-to-day or get involved in any of that sense. But I think for once that transition happened, it was, like conversation with my grandparents, conversation with my mom, like, look, okay, all these things are not going to happen anymore. And in all fairness, like my dad lived some of his last years on the business. So, financially I was very protective of the budget and just wanted to make sure that we were strong in our first year. So right or wrong, I probably went a little overboard on that, but I was very also like, you come to that realization like, oh, shoot, this is all on me now. You
get all the wins, you get all the losses.
Right. So all that weight of responsibility hits you in a totally different way. So a natural reaction is, okay, well, I'm going to be as tight and make sure we're running this very effectively. But, in some degree, maybe I didn't approach those conversations in the right manner, but they were conversations that needed to be had because we just didn't have them during the whole planning phase. Right.
And so ultimately you ended up owning the company. And the properties and everything that went along with that. So you bought your mom out.
Yeah.
And so who's still working in the business with you?
So my grandparents are still 6 days a week.
Really?
Yeah. My grandfather's 86. He's in every day. He's got a little corner in the back shop that, is his putter area. And he's there to support the guys if they need questions. He's repairing equipment. Came from seeing him actually this morning, and he had a trencher ripped apart, and he was working on fixing it. So, 86, but he's an amazing person. Him and I went on a 2-week World War I, World War II European trip last fall. So he would have been 85, but we'd climb a monument or something, and there's 65-year-olds all taking a breather, and he's marching right past them, right? So he's an amazing, amazing guy. And then my grandmother, she's still helping with some of the bookkeeping and finance. And so it's been a real pleasure that really my entire working career, if not my entire life, I've worked alongside my grandparents, so that's been really neat.
That's amazing.
And then when my dad passed, I brought my wife in to support me with some of those administration things my dad liked to do,
right?
That I had no time to do,
or like to do,
to do, but didn't feel like it was appropriate to necessarily pass them off. So, it created a lot of value for like my family. That we were 2 fresh babies at the time, so it allowed Martha to work from home, support me, but also for her to really care for our family at the same time.
So having gone through this, you have daughters. Are you bringing them into the business?
No, probably not.
So why is that?
For a couple of reasons. With our growth strategy and plan, I have joint venture partners, and our growth strategy eventually is to work towards. We're going to be at the size that the only person that could buy us is a private equity firm. So we have a path forward, but it ends with ultimately a sale. And I know, the reality is, our kids are going to struggle to even just buy a home, let alone where the business is going to be at that point.
Right.
It's not something I think they could afford to purchase. But
would you not consider bringing them in as working in the business in a management capacity, or being able to lead the business in some way, shape, or form?
Potentially, but probably not. Now that I got partners in the business and I see how, not that my grandparents are an issue, but where I've just seen them struggle with, even when my brother was in the business or when my mom was in the business, in reality, they're supposed to be an authority to them, but yet they're connected to ownership, right? There's that weird dynamic. And, with the fact that I know that we're probably not going to be looking at transitioning to the next generation, I don't know if there's necessarily value in bringing them in and having that weird dynamic again. Maybe as a job, but I don't see it potentially as that management.
So do you think after all this hard work that your dad did and all this hard work that you're doing, because you've grown the business quite a bit since your dad's passing, that you wouldn't want to maintain that and be like the Walmarts of the irrigation or real?
No, and my dad was on board with that. To be honest, the only reason he kept it was because I was so passionate about it. I think he would have sold it if I wasn't in high school doing everything I could to get out of school to go work. I don't know if Blue Jay would have still been, part of that opportunity. He, like I said, the full-time role at the church was so, he was so passionate about it. And at times, when he had all the weight and responsibility of Blue Jay. Yeah, I think honestly, it was at the point he was debating whether, was it worth keeping or not, to the point where he just shrunk it down so it was very manageable at the time, and it didn't need a lot of his involvement. Versus we've done the opposite. We've ramped up. Right. But with our growth trajectory, ultimately, it is something I see retiring on, and whether that's 10, 15, 20 years, I can't necessarily put a number on it, but he was aware of that vision, where we wanted to take it. Ultimately, the goal was to use an opportunity to have impact and influence on others. Right. But when that time comes, there might be a different opportunity to move on to where we can still live that life of impact and influence.
Now, if you got an opportunity to sell it now at a price that was, acceptable to you, would you start another business?
Yeah. Would it be seasonal? I don't know.
Yeah. Because it's interesting, as our purpose is to try to keep family businesses in the family, because only 30% of first generation businesses transition to 2. And by the time you get to 4, it's only 3%. Right. Because it's a big challenge, right? To get from first to second is hard enough. And some cases like you're kind of thrown into it. But after that, it becomes more of a conscious decision, because now you've been through it once. What do you want to do moving forward? So having been put into this position, not really ready to take over. Ready to take over in terms of your abilities, but not ready in terms of the decisions and the policies or processes or whatever you've documentation. What would you recommend to other family businesses, a first generation to second?
Yeah, my recommendation, the second generation, is you're gonna have to have the conversation. It's not easy for the first generation to have it about succession and transition. It isn't easy for them. I get that, but you need to push gently, push respectfully, but you need to push to have that conversation.
Because how old was your dad when he passed?
53.
So I think a lot of people, we don't even start to think about those things at that age, right?
I was running it at 27. I bought it at
Right.
27. So.
And you know what? And again, this is where you go back to look at your children are not necessarily children. As my son, same thing, running the business at, I think he was 26, 27, because again, it depends on your experience. But it's hard for parents to really sit down and have those conversations because they still think our kids is as young and that we still have a really long runway.
For sure.
But the moral of the story is to really, take a look at, is this a business, a family business, or just a business that's going to be sold? But what happens and where does it go and what's in place? What mechanisms
and even the
in place?
expectations, right? Like bring them in to your inner circle, help them understand.
Mm-hmm.
Like as much as I would say as much in the inner circle with my dad as it possibly could have been, and I still didn't understand the weight of what I was taking. And I remember him saying maybe a month before he passed, like, are you sure you really want this? Are you sure you want this weight? And I should have clarified it more, but I don't know at the time if I actually knew what he meant, what he was trying to say, right? Yeah. So my biggest, comment to first generation or that the current shareholder is bring them into that and help them understand truly what that weight of ownership is and what the burden is they're going to carry because, and really what the expectation is, because I've seen two things. I've seen friends that have taken over that ownership thinking that, they see dad going to the cottage, going golfing, and so they think they should be able to do that, and then the business falls apart.
Right.
But I've seen the opposite where they weren't fit to take the ownership, but they had this dream to take over ownership, and they were losing their identity into this business that wasn't even theirs. Mm-hmm. And next thing you know, their parents are letting them go because it's not the right fit, and they're looking to move it on to someone that's not in the family, right?
And that's a very hard thing to do, is to let go of that's your business hat that says, son, I love you, but you're not very good in this industry and you need to find another job.
Right.
Versus a family, it's like, I still love you. I heard you got fired today, but I still love you.
So for me, it was like, it was a gut check too, because it's like, okay, so is my identity wrapped up in Blue Jay? And I'm like, yeah, it is. I came to realize, like, yeah, my business is right now my identity, and it was a huge gut check and a huge change of mindset for me to realize that this weight of responsibility, it could be gone tomorrow. So why wrap my identity up in something that could potentially be gone tomorrow, right? It was a huge mindset shift for me, but something I needed to go through with a friend and walk with them in that for me to come to realize just where I'm at personally as well.
And how does your brother feel about all this now that he's, it's been a couple of years, and is he still in a good place?
We're in a good place. I mean, we're in a much better place. Like, I would say our relationship was very rocky leading up to him stepping out. And then, he came over yesterday with his little guy and we hung out on the back deck all afternoon. Like, we're in a much better place because of it. He's happy. Mm-hmm. He's got a great little family. Our relationship's better. It's funny, I went and helped him do a little project this spring at his house, and as soon as I made a suggestion where he felt like I was taking charge, his back went up.
Oh,
right?
Interesting, yeah.
So there's still some of that where it's like he doesn't want to be bossed around by me, versus I was making a suggestion to make this like, hey, I got a limited time, let's do as much of this as possible to help you out because you need two guys for this. And the rest you can do yourself, right? And he took it as me
telling him what to
do.
And that becomes, again, we talk about this all the time, that being a family is tough enough. And when you layer a business on top, it's very complicated. Yeah. And so many complexities. But one of the things is that as siblings, you remember as being younger, and the older one always doing this, the younger one always getting away with that. So that stuff comes back, and it becomes very difficult. And how's your mom with all this, does she know that it might not be a family business moving forward?
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, my mom and I, we're in a good place, but we don't necessarily talk to that degree where my vision is for the business or what I'm doing. She's enjoying retirement, but it's not necessarily a conversation I have with her of just my end goal or my vision for the business. And I think regardless what I do, she's content and enjoying what she's doing. So, but I mean, the reality is too, like if I didn't take the business, it probably would have been sold outside of the family anyways.
And we do know that when a death occurs and a business is sold, you're certainly not going to get the value that it's really worth, because people are looking for a deal, right? Which is the key to planning in advance. And even if the transition is not happening for a number of years, the plan to have it in place and know what's happening and to make sure everybody's on the same page to understand, also have it funded so that, it's not going to bankrupt anybody. And, your mom has enough money and you don't have a huge bank loan. And, again, you think this isn't an estate planning because your mom is still alive. That is another step. So I think people forget that there is you have more than just your son or daughter in the business. There's other siblings, and it's not about dividing up assets on the death, but it's a business that your spouse may or may not want to run.
Right.
And I get that. I didn't want to run my husband's and he didn't want to run mine. So, it's in place to say, well, if anything happened, here's what's going to happen, and here's going to be the safeguards in place, or the guards down the bowling alley to make sure it doesn't go into the gutter.
And it's allowed me, now that I've joint venture partners in our business, to have those conversations, to set up the planning for it appropriately, so that if something were to happen to one of them or myself, there's a game plan, there's a strategy, everyone's aware.
Lessons learned, right?
100%. So it is important, like whether it's family or not. I can get hit by a bus tomorrow.
Exit strategies.
I'm driving to my Niagara branch and I get into an accident on the queue. Anything can happen, right? So it is important, and I think going through this has helped me realize the importance of it. So,
okay, so summarize, give two quick takeaways that you would give to second generation families. So the kids in the business.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, first and foremost, you're gonna have to respectfully push to have that conversation. It's not easy for the first generation, but you need to. It's just the reality of it. Or even if you're not second generation, or even if you're a partner in the business and you haven't had this conversation or it's not set up, you need to push, because when it's too late, it's a mess and it's brutal. So respectfully, understand it's going to be a challenge. It may take a long time to finally flush all the details out. That's okay. But it starts with one conversation, which leads to another, and eventually you form out the plan. Second from that would be, as much as you can, get into what does it mean to be an owner, with the first generation. What's the weight of responsibility? Understand the sacrifices they made. And then even have that conversation. Okay, so if I were to take this over, what is your expectation? Because if they're retiring and you're doing a buyout over time, well, the reality is you're not going to the golf course, or you got to work harder to produce the funds to be able to support the person who's getting an earn out.
Yeah.
Plus making sure that you're achieving your vision and growing the business. So, really having a good understanding with that. And then I just highlight a third is just, where's your identity? Honestly,
I love that.
If your business if your identity is wrapped up in the business, I would really strongly take a check on that, because, and you read in books and all that where they're like, what do you want it to say on your tombstone? That you're a hard worker, right? That you wish you worked more in your business. Like at the end of the day, we all want to be known as, maybe a leader, a community ambassador, a family man who loved his kids and his spouse, whatever it may be. Think about that and make sure that the business is a tool and a vehicle for you to have that legacy you leave behind, but the business shouldn't be the legacy you're leaving behind, right? Legacy is what you leave in people, not what they get out of it. So.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you coming in and sharing your story. I know it's not, an ideal story when you're thrown into a business, but I got to tell you, you've done an amazing job in the last number of years of growing this business. So congratulations. So anyway, thank you again for coming in. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
If you like this episode, subscribe to the Business of Family podcast on your favorite listening platform. You can also find BlueRoots on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. On the next show, I'll be back with another amazing guest who will inspire you with their family business insights Until then, take care and keep it in the family. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, tax, investment, or insurance advice. Before acting on any advice, please contact your personal or company advisors.